All right, so I've got these aluminum templates that I made for these suspension mount brackets, and what I'm going to do now is transfer those onto 1/8 inch steel and get them cut out, and then we'll start fitting them in place and that. So what I've got here is some laser cut plates that I had made. I had these laser cut for the sake of getting this oblong hole accurate. So because this is a suspension mount for existing suspension or an existing suspension design, I wanted to make sure that I got the hole exactly as it was from the factory. So as far as length, and the width and all that stuff. So I had that laser cut into a bigger plate because at the time I didn't have any of the chassis, the tube parts of the chassis, any of that in place, and I wasn't 100% sure what the overall design of everything would be, how big my brackets would end up needing to be, or whatever on that end of it. So I decided I wanted to just have laser cut a bigger part that I could then trim down to what I needed. So these are obviously a lot bigger than what I need, but that's okay. And then I've got some extra plate to then roll into other parts of the project, that sort of thing. So I've got the little holes here, 1/8 inch holes that are the center. It's the center line of the hole where the bolt goes through, and that is going to get lined up in the center of this oval hole. So you might be thinking, well, how do you line that up with the center? So what I'm going to do, I already marked it on this one just to have something to show you, but basically there is an oval hole that I've marked on this template just to show you where that's going to go. So essentially it'll be something about like this. These brackets are different sizes as far as the length. They're different heights. One's a little taller because of the offset of how it is on the frame to get everything lined up. So basically in order to get this one lined up, all I did was grab a clamp here. I hung the plate off of the edge of the table and just put a clamp down on here just to hold the plate in place. And then got some clamps, straight edge. So because the top edge of this bracket is flat and it's parallel with the hole opening that I need, and this hole is, the hole is now perpendicular to this plate. So by putting this underneath, I know that, I just need to get it lined up with and perpendicular to the edge of this plate using that top edge of the template. So I put my straight edge underneath there, and all I did was eyeball and get my hole that I have in the aluminum template centered in the hole in the steel plate, and then made sure that that was along the edge of my straight edge, and then just use a clamp to clamp it in place underneath. Put a couple of them on there just for good measure. I'm gonna slide this out of the way. So on the back side, you can see the template is on my steel there, and I've got my hole centered up with the oval hole in the steel plate. So I marked the oval hole on the inside of that just so I'd have a reference on that template. But now what I'm gonna do is flip this over, knowing that my hole is exactly where I need it. Flip this over and trace the outside of my template, and that's where I'll need to cut. So what I like to do just for extra visibility is to mark it with a Sharpie first, because that gives me that high visibility black line. So get that marked all the way around. And then the last thing I do is grab my scribe, my awl, and mark the edge, and that puts that nice crisp line on the edge of my template on the steel, using that black Sharpie line to kind of highlight the edge of it. So scribe this all the way around. All right, I got that marked. So, I don't need I marked the oval hole in the aluminum template, but I don't really need that other than just being able to roll this template over to the other side of the chassis and use it for both sides. That way I make sure all my bracketry is the same. So remove these clamps, remove my template, and there is the scribed line in the bracket drawn out on the steel plate with the aluminum, with the hole in place there. So at this point I'm going to cut that out. Then I'm going to be welding pieces of 1/8 inch material in a perpendicular manner to like the length of the bracket this way. It'll be perpendicular this way, and then the bolt with the cam to be able to slide the bolt in that slotted hole for the suspension mount to be able to adjust the geometry of the suspension. So we're going to work on getting this cut out. We'll do the rest of these templates and we'll get you caught up then. All right, so I've got the initial lower bracket here for the toe link mount tacked together. Got it laid out on the steel, cut it out. What I did, so I originally had these aluminum templates that I made just to get the initial shapes. And then what I did was use these to then, I just basically left extra material up here and down on the bottom to create the flanges that I needed for the gusseting and extra strength of these. So on this one side, if this would have been flat, I bent this down using the bend press and bent that down this way, and then it meets up here with the other bracket, which then also bends that same direction. And then I've got the little angle shape, the V shape on the other side, and again the other bracket, I bent that flange in this way and then that way and got everything trimmed up. I did get it already fit to the frame, which I'll show you guys the process on the other side, of doing that. But yeah, got this all matched up and lined up. So what I'm going to be doing now, before I tack this in place on the chassis, is going to be putting. So I cut out all these little kind of token pieces of steel that I'm actually going to be placing on here at the specific width apart to get the, that's what the cam washer of the alignment bolt is going to be riding on. So basically this bolt drops in here, and if it's centered in that slotted hole, then it's kind of facing this way. But as it rides on that cam, when you turn it, it forces the bolt forward or backwards. So it allows you to get the toe alignment set up in there. So what I did is cut a spacer, the exact width of the washer that I can use to line up, centered over the oval, and it's got two flat surfaces on it that I can then line up these little token pieces with, get everything set, lined up, square, clamped in place, and then I can tack these on before I weld them. So, and then at the end, that little spacer piece will come out, and I'll be left with these two pieces that are welded onto both sides. So there's one going to go on this side and that side on both sides of the chassis. So yeah, so we're going to get those in place on this side, get them welded, and then we'll tack this to the car, and then we'll show you guys the process on the other side. All right, guys, so I'm ready to bolt on this bracket for this lower toe link mount, and basically everything's all tacked together as far as these two pieces were concerned. I'm going to finish welding this top seam once it's all attached on here. I got these little tabs welded in place here for the alignment. So again, the alignment bolt, the bolt to hold it on will go in place here, and you can see as you rotate the bolt one way or the other, it slides the bolt forward or backwards in the slotted hole that is in this bracket. So that'll all be good to go. Yeah, so we'll slide it in place here. Get it as close as we can. Get the bolt through that way, and then there's the little cam washer on the back side as well. So it's on both sides. So there's it can hold it, straight where it needs to be. So we'll get that in place. And I'm going to tighten this up on the jig. That way I know it's held where I want it. And once we get it close, we'll make sure that the bolt is holding everything centered or up against the chassis where it needs to be there. Everything looks good as far as that's concerned. And we'll go ahead and finish tightening this up. So now that's nice and tight with the bolt centered in the slotted hole on the fixture, and it's all lined up, with the chassis here. So at this point it's ready to tack in place and then weld it in. So once that's done, we'll jump over to the other side, get it caught up with this, and then after that we will be dropping these back in place and finishing up the mount here. And we'll get that welded and get it all attached to, incorporated with this lower toe link mount on both sides. And then the last thing we'll end up doing is putting the upper link mount on and getting that built and in place. So we'll keep working forward. All right, so the next step on this rear section here, we got this lower bracket welded in place and it's all solidified and good to go. So the next step is to get the bracketry for this, where this mount needs to be for this lower control arm. So what I've done, which I showed a little bit, was quickly making a template for the front, and then proceeded out by making a template for the back. And after that, once I had those templates finished up, I made a template that's going to be the top gusset that fits around this tube and then onto the plate that's in here and everything, so it'll then weld to those other pieces. So I took those and I transferred them to steel, put the hole in it for the mount, get everything notched to fit the frame the way everything is, and then I put 2 dimple die holes in here, 1-inch dimple die, and that really adds a lot of strength to this 1/8-inch plate, for the purpose of keeping the plate light and then still adding the strength to it. So so that's in there. This back bracket, got it cut out, dimple die hole in the back, and then welded a weld-on nut to the back side here, because that's where the bolt for the control arm is going to go through, and so you don't have to have 2 wrenches, just one. It'll thread and tighten onto here. So got that made for that. So I'll get these 2 in place real quick. Load this in here. Okay, so got that kind of snug there. Now this top gusset bracket, got this cut out, a couple more dimple die holes, again for strength, and got that all fit to this top tube plate that fits right on top of the mount plates for the lower control arm. So now the next step is going to be to tack weld this together. I'm going to actually bench weld a couple of these welds off, and then I'll put all three of these on as a unit, get it bolted in, and then I'll start welding it to the frame. So. All right, guys, we're on the home stretch on this rear chassis section here. So basically, at this point, I've got both sides of the front control arm and toe link mount, the rear control arm mount in place. So the last mount I'm working on for the control arms is the upper mount here. So I've got the other side in place already, but I wanted to show you basically what I do. What I did for this, I did not make a template first out of paper or sheet metal of the bracket. Instead, I just decided to make some measurements and be able to draw it out on my plate. So I already had these plates laser cut with the exact size of slotted hole that is required for the alignment adjustment in this upper control arm link there. And these are straight out. There's no angle to them. Like these brackets here all have some angle to them to line up with everything properly. This top one is straight perpendicular with the frame rail here, so that way that link comes straight out, and then as that's adjusted, it affects the as the toe link as well, they affect the angle of the knuckle and everything that's out here. So instead of making templates, I just went ahead and did some measurements. So it's pretty simple, just measuring up from the table height to the bottom of the tube, and then also from the table to the hole here on my spacer. And what that tells me is the height of the tube at the bottom of where the bracket's supposed to fit on to the tube of the chassis, and then the height of the bottom of the slotted hole here. Now, I know based off of measuring the original Mustang cradle, I know that the width I needed from center to center of these holes was, I believe right around 34 inches. So what I did was took the frame rail width measurement of the frame rail tube on both, from both sides there. So I took the overall width, and then I took the center line width, and then I subtracted that distance, divided it by 2, and that gave me the distance that I needed from the center of the slotted hole to the edge of the frame rail tube here on this bracket. So I've got that drawn out there as far as the height and the placement there. And then I went ahead and drew out some gussets that will be part of this. Now there's a square section right here on the top that is going to get bent over, and that ends up laying across the top of the tube to get welded. So the bracket comes around the tube, goes across the top, and then goes back down around the tube. And then this lower gusset section gets bent, and that gets welded to the bottom of the edge of the tube as well. And then the bracket for the front side is here. So there is no upper section, because that's going to get welded to the upper section of this one as it comes across the top of the tube. And then it goes around the tube, and there's another gusset area here that ends up getting bent out, and that'll get welded to the plate down here on the frame. So just like I said, did the measurements based off of the frame heights and the hole heights and all that sort of thing in order to get these marked out and in place. So like I said, I got the other one in place, so I'll show you that. And at this point, what we really need to do is just start cutting these out, and then we'll get them bent and in place, and then we can start welding this in place. And the last thing to do will be to assemble all the control arms. And The absolute last thing I'm going to do for the rear suspension here is to then make the coilover mount that will, off of the frame, that will, have the coilover be able to attach to it to support the weight of the car. So yeah, at this point, we'll get these cut and keep working. All right, so I've got these brackets made, so we got them cut out on the bandsaw, and then I went over to the belt sander and finished cleaning them up, deburred them, all that sort of thing, and then went over to the bend press and put the brakes in them to complete the bracket shape. So this one here goes on the back side right here. It's got this where we bent it here just about 90 degrees, not quite, because the mount does lean slightly forward. So got that in here to where this lays on top of the frame rail tube. Then there's the other brake here that then lines up with the bottom of the tube, and that'll get welded on both top and bottom. And then this bracket goes on, and then those two brackets meet right at that point there, and will get welded. And then the brake that's here is about a 45, so when this is on here, it lines up with the structure plate that we have in the frame here, and it gets welded there. So at this point, we can throw a bolt in, kind of get them in place here. I'm using a stack of washers because there's a nylock nut on here, so I don't want to be using that every time. So just to hold it snug in place, get these brackets pressed on where they're supposed to be, get that snug. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to tack it right here a couple times. We'll get this welded and metal finished out, and then the last thing will be to weld this onto the tube there. So. All right, guys, now that we got all these brackets all welded on both sides, now what we're going to do is go ahead and install the rear diff and the control arms and all those parts in order to just triple check that they all fit, and we'll show you guys what it looks like all together. And then the last step will be to figure out exactly where the coilover location will need to be, and we'll build those mounts. All right, well, we've got everything bolted on, starting with the rear diff here in the middle. So got that bolted on to the cross members and such, and the mounts that we built here, and it sits in place just like it should, bolted right up. And then we got all the control arms and everything bolted onto the mounts that we made. So you can see all the individual pieces here. So you got the upper link here to the top tube here. Then you have the lower control arm, both mounts here, and then you have the toe link on the bottom that's bolted there. So all that bolted up really nicely. Everything's kind of in the center of its alignment right now, and looks pretty good as far as that's concerned. So at this point, would be ready to keep moving on to the rest of the car. So that wraps up the rear chassis video series that we've done for you guys. So we appreciate you guys following along. We know it's been a little bit of a timely process, but it's something that's worthwhile to sit down and watch, to be able to give your maybe some insight into some projects that you want to work on, some ideas on how to do stuff, that sort of thing. So thanks for watching this video, and we'll see you in the next series.